This is Edwin K. Morris, and you are about to embark on the next Pioneer Knowledge Services Because You Need to Know, a digital resource for you to listen to folks share their experience and knowledge around the field of knowledge management and nonprofit work. If your company or organization would like to help us continue this mission and sponsor one of our shows, email byntk@pioneer-ks.org.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Hubert Saint-Onge. I live in Waterloo, Ontario. What makes that place very interesting is that we have a lot of Mennonite people that surround us. So every time you go out in a car, you have to be careful for horse and buggies kind of traveling beside you. What I do for a living is that I'm an organizational consultant. I do work in organization and leadership. I have in the past done a great deal of work around collaboration and knowledge, formation of networks, all of that jazz. I'm more of a social technical kind of guy. I help an organization wire itself up so that the knowledge flows appropriately, collaboration works, manage interdependence, and those kinds of things. So, yeah.
How do you envision the future?
The future I envision as organizational hierarchies receding systematically and collaboration networks kind of coming to the fore where people are accountable because they work with one another with mutual accountability, essentially, accountable to one another for making things happen. It will then lessen the load on organizations for cost and management and all that jazz. Will help move faster and develop capability as the need arises for that capability with the shift of strategies and the various changes that organizations have to constantly undertake at this point.
And who would you say is a very important mentor for you?
Oh, mentor. Most of my mentors, actually, just to give you an idea of where I am in the scheme of things, have passed away. I'm on the front lines now. So Brian Hall, I met some 25 years ago, did a lot of work on values, organizational and personal values. And I apprenticed with him for some 15 years and learned an awful lot from him on what makes people tick, on how you go about aligning values in an organization, how to be aware of your own values as an individual and live by them with some form of moral integrity that helps us move along with the various periods of crises in your life. So that's what Brian did with me. Probably another inspiration for me was Ed Schein, who's also passed away not so long ago. I love his book on what consulting truly is. I follow his advice on how to listen well, on how to guide people, on how to coach them the best way possible, those kinds of things. It's the art of the possible, actually. That's what it is. But it's all about hearing people out and then providing some perspective and asking some questions, mostly questions. There's nothing like a good set of questions to actually say exercise influence in the room or with a leader or a team.
So what topic can you talk about for hours and hours and hours?
So a number of topics. I can talk about leadership forever. I can talk about organizational interdependence and collaboration for hours. I can talk about capability development, which sounds really boring, but is very interesting and fundamental to an organization.
Is it similar to organizational development?
Yeah, it is. It is organizational development. In fact, knowledge is all about organization development. See, knowledge is about capabilities at the individual level and capabilities at the organizational level. Yeah, I work at both levels very consciously because both levels are important. A lot of practitioners that I know focus on either one, mostly at the individual level, and some of them only at the organizational level. But for me, the systemic view involves understanding both of those dimensions intrinsically and working them in parallel.
And how do you approach the unobservable? So those two domains are physical and touchable, they're physical, they're physical elements. But how do you get to the tacit in either one of those participants, organization or people?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time noodling on tacit knowledge because I've done extensive work on values. It's given me kind of a window into that question.
Okay.
Our values are fundamentally tacit, and you need some very insightful tools to actually be able to identify values. In fact, the tools that Brian Hall has shared with me have become one of the key practitioners that actually applies this technology. What that does is that when you actually apply these tools, people discover that they have values they've never talked about. In fact, many of the values they claim to have are not present in their psyche. So, for instance, define values as prioritized ideals. So values are all positive ideals, but they're prioritized. Makes a big difference. If your value collaboration, for instance, is at the very top, and if it is at the bottom of your priorities.
Are you saying that most folks are unconscious of where their actual values lie?
Yeah, well, generally they have a general sense, but very often when you ask them to name them, they can't name them, or when they do name them, they're not accurate. So I'll give you an example. I was talking with this executive, 45-year-old, very charged up, highly successful. He said, well, I don't know if I need to go through this values identification exercise because family is where it's at for me. Family is all it is. I did the work, and lo and behold, it's at the very bottom of all sorts of other values. There's probably 20 values above family and family orientation, and family preoccupation, and caring, and so on and so forth. It had become for him an act of faith and claimed to be doing it. But when you actually started to have conversations with him about what matters the most for him, family just didn't quite register.
Didn't come to the top. Yeah. Actions are everything, right? You can pontificate all you want. Well, I believe this, I believe that. But when it all comes out in the wash, you can actually see where the time is spent. If it is for family or if you're still working, then how are you saying this is for family? You're saying that you have to do this values inventory in order to really get a clearer picture, and not just for an organizational benefit, but for the self-awareness of the individual.
Absolutely. I do debrief with individuals that's about 2 hours long on their values. It's very much of a dialogue. It's not me speaking about, the results of the inventory. It's about them exploring and finding out what it is and what it's saying about them. And what's interesting is that in this value framework that Brian Hall has left us, he has 126 values on 7 levels of development. And there are tracks right throughout these 7 levels of development. And you can actually talk about the logic of their inner self and how that logic works that is actually not known to most of us. But by making it clear, people say, whoa, this makes so much sense.
Yeah, because you're dealing with what some organizations would tend to think of things that are shadow driven, meaning things that are under the hood that drive behavior that the person is not even aware of why they're acting this way or not acting a certain way. And it really takes some reflection and somebody that's driving the boat a little bit to help them navigate in order to help figure that stuff out. But once that light bulb goes off, there's no going back. There probably a few step backs, but I mean, really, it's hard to start from the unaware position ever again.
Yeah, I show them a map of how things interact in their inner logic. And then it becomes a map as well for their development, because there's always in this map 1 or 2 or 3 key values that have not fallen into place to complete the picture in an appropriate way. And say, if you were to put more emphasis on X, it would unlock a whole new set of possibilities for you as an individual in terms of your own development, your leadership purview, and so on and so forth. This is where it gets really interesting. So the tacit knowledge stuff, I've done a lot of work on. And another dimension of tacit is the whole idea of mindsets. We're all walking around with mindsets that we've acquired over time. There are formulas that we've developed that have become quasi-automated in our own psyche, and it guides what we see and what we don't see. It guides how we react to certain things, because we don't have time to think things through when we're sitting, in the middle of a situation or with a team or whatever. So our mindsets are ever present and have a great deal of power on the way we handle things. And they're not easy to change. We have to be very conscious of what we're doing about debunking them. And yet they can be incredibly self-limiting.
Well, they're hardwired to an emotional reaction. A lot of it is just so tightly wound around our identity, because a lot of those processes are the building blocks of who we think we are. In order to change a mindset, you have to be willing to change who you are.
It's a big sentence, in order to change your mindsets, you have to change who you are. It has, yes, I agree with you, Edwin. It's tied to one's self-concept. So essentially tied to some extent with your ego. Ego plays a big role in all of this. But your ability to actually understand that you, first of all, have mindsets, to recognize them when they come to the fore, and to be able to debunk those that are not helpful to you anymore through reflection and through just trying to confronting yourself with things that could have been handled better that kicked in somehow. And different things would kick in depending on the intensity and emotional nature of the situation. How we react under fear, how we react when elated about something.
I think the classic example of what you just put forth is the idea that when you're a youth, you make these cachet memories, these memories of how your parents treated you, and you say, I am never going to treat my children that way. I'm never going to say that to my kids. And then, go ahead 25 years, and you're like, oh my good God, I sound just like my old man. It's like, I hear you and I identify with it. And I want everybody out there to think of that in order to change a mindset, you really have to look under your own hood first before you can even start to understand. Because like you said, if you can identify the true traits, but also in the same breath, identify the gaps, that's probably probably more valuable than knowing what the actuals are, because you're operating under a precept that I'm doing okay. I'm pretty good. Just like your example of your executive. Oh, what the heck? Well, I don't need this value stuff. Come on, that's for babies. But it really is a purposeful thing. So how do you translate that to an organizational level?
I have done many value surveys in organizations. And what that does is that we use the same values framework validated by Brian around the world. It's a global tool. Start talking about what are the values that are prevalent in an organization. I'll always remember sitting in an office, not so far from the executive offices, with a senior executive. We start to go through his values and then looked at the organizational values. And all of a sudden, there was a look on his face that said, I am out of here. I understand now what's going on.
Oh.
And it was a very difficult moment, because the senior executives were all around us. He was absolutely so clear all of a sudden. It's like it dawned on him. He was obviously having a lot of frustration.
Mm-hmm.
This moment just of superimposing the organizational and personal values just absolutely drove him up a wall.
So are you saying that they were just so opposite? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
or what?
Very rarely is it opposite. Otherwise, you wouldn't make it through the door. So there's interviews and things like this. People don't know what they check for in interviews and things like that, but they try to get a sense of the person. And they say, well, I think he'll fit or she'll fit or whatever. By living in an organization, there will be some values that are absolutely anathema to your own. And you can forgive them, but as things get harder, they become a lot more painful to live with.
That probably has something to do with gaining a few more years on the planet that helps you to recognize those pain points and say, wow, something is not right here, or something's lacking.
the great majority, 99% of the people out there are not going out of their way to make things difficult for people. The clash comes from making choices that are very different across people and how they exercise their own awareness around those values that are actually guiding their own well-being in organizations.
So is this value inventory available for anybody to take?
It is not that clearly available, but if anyone is interested, there are a couple of places that offer it. So Values Technology is one. There's an outfit in Australia called Minescence that offers them.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to get access to it, I'm glad to guide them to it.
I think there's definitely an advantage to organizations and individuals to at least start to, if you've never done one, at least try it, because you may get a very big surprise.
Actually, the last organization I was an internal, I've only been a consultant for 22 years. Before then, I was in organizations. I was responsible for a number of functions like strategic planning and human resources, internal and external communication, and various other things. And one of the things that I did, because I'd worked with Brian Hall when I was doing a lot of work in leadership in another organization, is that I put this tool on our website, internal website, and people could go in at their choice and confidentially go through that exercise of prioritizing their values. And because the questionnaire is highly valid, then they would get the result of this. And then what we then put on this tool on the website, the internal website, is something where people were saying, if I want to exercise leadership, what is it that I need to be better at that is a bit of a blind spot for me? So then it was all automated. The computer would kind of say, okay, the kinds of things you need to look at are these, and these.
Yeah.
This was a very popular aspect of our website. What was interesting is that I was a member of the executive of that company. It was an insurance company in Waterloo. It was actually the largest manufacturer of insurance in Canada at the time. We sold to another company. One of the first things they did was to unplug this website. Describing to you. Well, first of all, they couldn't understand what it was all about. It was totally under the control of the employee himself or herself.
Yeah.
It was entirely confidential. It was just something that was completely against the grain. Talking about values.
They quickly identified what they don't want to see.
Well, yeah, very quickly. And I was amongst those.
Oh, my.
Yes.
Yeah, what a resource. That is a great concept. It's not like HR's coming out and say you have to do this, or somebody's pushing it down somebody's path that they have to fill this out. You just kind of put it out there, and people that are inquisitive or concerned, or especially with posing the question like you did, or what was there about leadership, well, geez, who wouldn't want to, find out? That's better than a Chinese fortune cookie. I mean, come on,
that's long gone.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's long gone. But you gave a good example of, I think, what a lot of organizations could easily employ in order to challenge their people to get better or to improve. Not better, but to improve.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So how does this all fit into knowledge? We've talked about people values, organizational values, and hopefully knowledge handling and knowledge itself is a value, let's hope. What do we talk about when we talk about knowledge?
I define knowledge as the ability to get things done effectively. So knowledge is actually a capability. Knowledge is the development.
Knowledge is an action. Knowledge is an action verb for you.
Yeah.
Getting stuff done.
Yeah. If you have the required knowledge, you can actually get things done effectively. It's that simple. When I was doing a lot of work in knowledge around the world, that's how I define knowledge, saying, it's all about being faster at developing the capabilities that you require. For some reason, capabilities is not a big concept in most organizations. When they need some skill of some kind, they go out and hire. So capability is another one of those concepts that functions just equally well at the individual level as it does at the organizational level. So there was this example of a client I was doing strategic planning, and they decided that that was an area that they could get in based on their capabilities. And then when they started to look at it, as it became highly promising, but then they backed right off because it meant that they would have had to be a lot better at dealing with customers, and it was just not part of their culture. It was just not part of their tacit management kind of thing, and they backed right off. As opposed to saying, okay, so how do we tackle the culture here so that client centricity becomes something that's important to us? If that is how our organizations are functioning out there, what we're seeing is a lot of people self-limiting their organizations.
And that's definitely a reflection of the culture, though, right? People will either be brave or not brave in any fashion you want to put that in. In order to put an idea out there or to innovate or to ask questions takes a little bravery in some cultures. And in some cultures, nobody does that because people get stepped on when they interfere with the flow. I want to bring up a term that has always sparked an interest for me. And actually, what you brought forth was this actionable bit, that it's not just data for data's sake. Where actually knowledge is something that's doable. We can do something, and as you said, faster, quicker, more proficient, less resources, keep adding on those descriptions. It all goes back for me to a Greek term called phronesis. So I pulled up Oxford's definition. Phronesis is a Greek term which means practical wisdom, which gives the idea that you're not just coming up with words and paragraphs like some people do, but this is actually, what are we going to do about something? And it's actionable. It's something that's going to have some teeth to it.
Absolutely. So I've written a book about communities of practice, very much based on that. Actually, what was interesting in that insurance company is that we had 3,500 financial advisors covering the country and actually advising their clients along the lines of very similar products. And yet they were not learning from one another. There was no learning from one another. The whole idea was to send them to classes or to have learning events of one kind or another. But we never gave them a chance to talk with one another, to compare notes.
Oh, my.
To actually say, hey, I'm having a problem with this particular aspect here.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this is coming up as an obstacle in the marketplace. How do you resolve this? That's how communities of practice function. They function on the basis of questions. So this poor slob somewhere in the middle of nowhere is kind of saying, I'm really not knowing where to do here. They put up the question, 25 people come in. Oh my God, I just had one yesterday about it. So 3,500 people got became active on this thing, and then started to threaten the hierarchical structure. Like there was
yes, they don't want that, did you?
It was very interesting.
Take me back. So before the community got organized in order to start sharing information and knowledge, where everybody was in their own bubble, doing their own thing, and was it a competitive sales kind of thing, or?
Actually, that's a very interesting question, Edwin, because I would go in various places and talk to advisors. I would bring them together. I'd go to a regional center and sit down. They'd come from all over the place, and we'd sit down and talk about what they were doing.
Right.
I don't think too many executives did that. I was the only person that was kind of going around doing that. And at one point, that very question came up. I said, well, so you guys are talking very openly with one another. Aren't you, in fact, competing with one another? You're in the same center. You're offering the same services and so on and so forth. One person stood up, very interesting person, and said, we're a rural area here, and we know about corn. I said, well, okay, tell me about corn. He said, well, if you grow good corn, its seeds will blow onto the neighbor's cornfield, and over time, you will benefit from it. Mm-hmm. It's the same here. If somebody from this organization has very good client relationship, they meet somebody who's in the same organization, then they'll be more willing to work with me. Mm-hmm. It was a very interesting way. So all of a sudden, turning it from a competitive type situation to actually a collaborative type situation. Our first reaction is often one of being competitive. So for instance, I really believe that the biggest strength of any organization is their ability to partner. In fact, the health of an organization is totally dependent on their ability to partner and the number of partnerships that they build over time. In one organization right now, we're it's become such an act of faith that we're talking about putting together a partnering council.
Wow.
So where those efforts are being prioritized and where
Yeah.
people bring different ideas and so on and so forth.
I can see value of having that mindset because it does a lot of things. But by partnering, you introduce organization to organization learning. You give people perspectives that they never would have had before in both organizations, right? You're combining certain things now. There's some resource share there, possibly, and cost share. Basically, in a biology sense, it's reproducing itself to have more coverage, I guess. Why do you say that is what'd you say, the most valuable thing an organization can do? What?
Indicator of the health of an organization. Yeah. Fundamentally, what's happening to our world is that it is becoming increasingly complex. Hierarchies were built for a simpler world. For instance, I'm an avid reader of what's going on in Ukraine and war in Russia and things like this. And one of the weaknesses of the Russian army is proving to be the hierarchy against the Ukraine that's functioning more as a network. So they have junior people that are still commanders of groups, but they have so much more room to maneuver than they do on the Russian side, where they have to kind of have conversations with their commanding officers about what to do next, who don't know what's going on the terrain where they are. That's happening all the time right now, that happened just last week. I do a lot of work with scale-ups, technology scale-ups. This one group had been very successful with the mid-market, and the CEO decided to go into enterprise segment, start to bring in people that were going to make this work, and all of a sudden, more and more larger companies were using their solutions. Well, as they came in, they became a lot more complex to deal with than
before. Yeah, right.
And now all of a sudden, somebody would start working on something that had to do with what somebody else was doing in another part of the organization, and they had to go up to their bosses up the line, get that resolved so they could come down to the other side, and then things got completely plugged up. Now, it may sound like I'm exaggerating, but that's exactly what's going on. Talking with this CEO, and I'm saying, so what do you think is happening? And he described that, just like I'm describing it now. It became clear to him. It's painfully clear to him. Yeah. So what do we do about this? Well, we need to build client service teams. Oh, well. You see, client service teams, communities of practice, and all those kinds of things, they're all collaborative networks.
And they're anti-hierarchical, correct? I mean, this is a...
Well, anti may be too strong a term, but they are the antithesis of hierarchical, yes.
Okay.
But they function within a hierarchical kind of structure.
Yeah.
But you almost have to build a bracket. Now, that's very interesting. You have to build a bracket for that network to actually live and thrive and be given its a license to operate as a network and collaborate.
I just got to say, that takes a lot of trust. Organizations have to trust that their people will do this well.
Yes, and that is definitely a challenge, Edwin. I mean, so that next example, actually, that I was about to give connects to that point very closely. What do you do when your product management effort becomes more and more complex and has to move faster and faster? What you do is you go to Agile. Agile is forming value streams that are made out of team members that are working with similar criteria, but that essentially are working at the same level, sorting things out together faster than they would if they had to refer to the whole hierarchical kind of framework of the company. Essentially, what we're trying to do in Agile is build them as a network, connect them to the customers, connect them to sales, connect them to marketing, and allow them as a group to come up with products that are innovative and creative, unblocked by the mindsets we were talking about earlier that exist in different parts of the company, mostly at the upper levels. So those folks now have the ability to be in charge of what they are doing and accelerate the development of products.
So what you just described, I would guess in economic terms, business-wise 30 years ago would be putting somebody in charge of a profit center and say, go make this work. Like, this is your business, go execute. But you're talking about a decentralized ability to have pockets of these agents, my word, these agents of change or mind breaking, if you will, of the old paradigm scattered throughout the organization. Yeah? Or are you saying they're all working in one channel?
No, they're all working in different, they're
all over.
All over. They're coming from all over the place. If you're going to have a value stream working on a particular set of products, you need to have represented around that table the various facets of that product, the electronics, the physical components, so on and so forth.
Anything that's touching that pie, they need to be there. Interesting.
And another example that's actually not counter to hierarchy is that processes in global organizations are complex by nature. And we have people operating these processes individually, each in their niches, doing things, let's say a supply chain, whatever the process is. So now what we do is that we form process communities. Process community has people from around the globe that are operating this process, sitting down and saying, what's not working for us these days, and what is it that we need to do to continuously improve this thing? So there's a business process owner who has purview and is a sponsor, not the manager, is the sponsor of the community on that process. And it's the community that is accountable for keeping the process up to date as they encounter new challenges.
So in order to have those agents of change, my words, and this community of process, does it take us all the way back to doing the values inventory? You have to have a values inventory in order to align people to a value.
Well, the problem with doing that is that it's time consuming. It would help. You can actually bring a process community together quite easily because they are working on the same tools and they're working with the same problems and have the same challenges.
There's a lot of common knowledge across.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, yeah. Okay.
So you need values when they're kind of free agents in the system. They need to orchestrate themselves based on self-guidance. And that's when you bring in the values work. Values work can be very powerful in those instances.
So where are we going to hang our hat in 30 years?
So what's going to happen in 30 years? I think in 30 years, a lot more importance will be given to networks in the organization and how they're woven right through. There will be greater complementarity between the chain of accountability and how the work is getting done, as opposed to being, so keep saying you and I are having this thing about, no, it's not anti, it's actually with.
Well, your better is it's complementary. It's not competition. It's making everything better. It's complementary.
And it's also developing trust that if you do the right thing with people, they'll do the right thing. That is, the fundamental, very basic stuff, right? Yeah. Allow them to be completely committed to what they're doing and fully rewarded by doing the work.
So do we get, in 30 years, are we going to get rid of middle management? Will that no longer be required?
No, actually, poor middle management is always getting beaten up, and yet they hold the whole thing together in the end.
No. All the people at the top are the most important. You know that. Yeah. Come on.
Well, people at the top don't have a clue what's going on. Interesting because somebody in Japan, I read this article by a Japanese leadership person. At the bottom, the first line manager knows about 85% of what's going on. And then he went through the different layers, and as he was going up, the percentage kept going down. And as we got to you got to the CEO, it was 8%. 8%. You know, about 8% what was happening. I was with a client, the CEO, and we were talking about a number of things that we've been working on together. And at one point he said, well, actually, Hubert, one of the things I'd like to talk to you about is my team today. I said, oh, okay, so what's happening there? He said, well, I sense that there are some difficulties in some people getting along and collaborating. Could you go and talk to them? As soon as I heard that, it was like, okay, I know. all hell's breaking loose. And it's just the odd thing that's kind of coming up, poking into his existence, kind of saying, you have a problem, buddy. But, it's like at the 8% level of intuition. I think things are not quite the way it should be. I went down and interviewed the individual. They were up in arms. They were up in arms. There was still a war was going on across the team. I mean, it was amazing.
Perspective and elevation. And as an infantry guy, when you're dug into positions in a defensive position, your visibility as the guy in the hole is about maybe 200 yards if it's good visibility. But that's at that level. And as you go up the chain in the hierarchy of warfare or military system, it was like the shift was different. I wouldn't say they knew less, they just knew different, meaning that at the soldier level, you knew about 200 feet in front of you. That's what your space was. But as your elevation came up in the hierarchy, your bigger pie was the strategic piece, stuff that at the bottom would never know. So it was almost a flip of what you just said. They have to know more the higher up they go. They've got a bigger piece of the pie.
So can I quibble a little bit with this?
Sure. Yeah.
I fundamentally agree with your point. It's where I fall off a bit is when we say they have to know more. What happens is that at different levels of the organization, you need to have a different, as you say it yourself, a different perspective. You need to be able to function at a level that would allow you to be able to see the system as a whole. And as you go up one more or two or three more levels, then that requirement becomes more and more important. Yeah. It's not what you know, it's how you see. It's at what level are you actually functioning to see things that would otherwise other people that are not functioning at that level can't see.
They wouldn't even have a clue. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, this is something that's highly controversial. A lot of people that have done work in this arena of development, the ability to see more systematic stuff or systemic stuff, get beaten up a lot because people say, well, that's an elitist view of the world because, everybody has the same capability in that regard. I don't believe that personally. So Robert Kaplan at the School of Education at Harvard, on Faculty of Education actually, has written a book about living above our means conceptually. That's the subtitle of the book. And essentially what it is that all of us function at a certain level of capability and purview based on what we've been exposed to, based on our experience, based on a number of other things, while other folks are quite happy to maintain their garden and to keep it nice and clean. And now you will sit with these people and they will actually talk to you. I know I have a friend that, where we have a cottage, who will talk to me about the world's problems sitting in his garden. And that's pretty well what this guy does all day, but he has an incredible view. But if you put him in an organization and put him in charge of a large number of businesses and so on and so forth, there ain't no way this guy's going to be able to see it because he hasn't got the experience and the ability to actually see it as a system. But this guy in his garden is the most brilliant guy. And I love sitting down with him and talking to him because I always learn stuff, right?
Yeah.
Somehow we haven't discovered how to talk about levels of perception and...
Or is it comprehension? Or is it both?
Because my guy in the garden has comprehension of a whole lot of stuff that is way beyond me, when he starts talking. It's the ability to see the signals and put them into the right context. And if you haven't got experience at that level of organizational work, I'm talking about organizational work all the time, you will not be able to actually function at that level because you just cannot put the pieces together. It requires a certain amount of experience to be able to say, if this is happening, I better go and check that because there's probably going to be that going on as well, right? Those levels of functioning actually come with development. And that's not what we need to be very careful about, that my friend Kaplan ended up not pursuing this line of thought because of this criticism of being elitist. Or
how can, it seems to me that it's biology and intelligence. I don't see that as because you could use the same premise talking about lions and raccoons. There's probably just personality traits of all animals that they either only see the thing in front of them and want that, versus other animals that, well, I don't know. Last time we did that, then this dog came out. How is that elitist? It's just a natural thing.
We're in such difficult terrain, Edwin.
Are they saying that deep thinkers are elitist?
Well, people will be judgmental in all sorts of ways. I do believe that when I do executive coaching, the main challenge in executive coaching, and I do a lot of executive coaching these days, is to help people be able to function at the level at which they're now working.
And that's probably easier for some and harder for others.
Yeah. And, when we're talking about building collaborative networks that complement the hierarchy, we're talking about actually growing people's ability to see the system systematically. I'm not sure it's a matter of biology. I think it's mostly a matter of exposure.
Tell me more about that. So the more you stand in a line, the more you know about a line? What are you saying?
With exposure comes lessons learned. Well, it depends a lot on your learning agility. You see, learning agility is a topic we haven't talked about, but it's a topic I spent a lot of time on, because you could put people in a network. So if we say knowledge is the acquisition of capability, knowledge is the ability to take effective action when something comes up. That's what knowledge is. In order to do that, as the work keeps moving, then you need to be constantly in a movement. If your learning agility is at a lower level than others, you will fall behind and then feel that you're not treated as you should be. So the understanding of learning agility has to be deepened in our work.
So this goes back to the values of inquiry, right?
Oh, yeah.
In order to be a good learner, probably there's a correlation there between being an inquiring person.
Yeah. So the whole idea behind communities of practice, we've covered a lot of ground since we start to talk, is productive inquiries. So productive inquiry is asking a question that people love and have discovered themselves and have a passion for it, and they will give you everything you'll ever ask for in order to understand what your inquiry is about.
There's a lot more we can talk about. I think we're going to probably do this again. At least the invitation is there. But I thank you very much, Hubert, for being here. Is English your first language?
No, it's not. No, I'm Francophone. I speak Spanish. I speak fluent Spanish. I keep working on Spanish.
Well, I ask you to say your goodbyes in your preferred language.
Okay. Au revoir à tout le monde. À bientôt.
If your company or organization would like to help us continue this mission and sponsor one of our shows, email byntk@pioneer-ks.org. Just finished our latest Because You Need to Know, a public service of Pioneer Knowledge Services. Please join us on LinkedIn and find us at pioneer-ks.org.